you ever felt.
Are you listening? Damn. Yeah.
Well, Kyle, thank you so much for being on, man.
Absolutely.
I know we had to reschedule this like 3 times, but we are here in person. I'm super excited because the few meetings that I've sat in with you, have, for me, I think you've got a product that if we can get it out there could help with affordable housing or attainable housing, whatever we're calling it these days. So super happy to have you on. And I want you to kind of just dig into it.
Okay.
And
it's absolutely a pleasure.
Hit me with all the data, and, hopefully somebody hears this and can truly see this product for what it is. Because I think that holistic plan that you detailed in the meeting here in Bayfield was like, this is it. Like, guys, this is it. We could actually do something like this, and let's figure it out. So, so give us the 2-minute skinny.
Okay.
What do we got?
So Timber Age Systems, and this is really fun. As you start something up, and maybe it starts as a hobby. I think sometimes it has to. You just have to have something going on, right? So this started in our garage, but it was very much trying to figure out how to address 3 main problems. It was what do we do with the forests that we're living in and around because of the fire and the disease and all the bugs and that kind of stuff. The second main thing was, my kids had some great teachers, and they're about 3 years apart. It was very seldom that same teacher was around for my youngest, that my oldest loved. And it was just because it was such a hard place to stick. This region is a difficult place to be able to put roots in. And I think the third one was really just this idea of saying, man, we've got a lot of really skilled people that could be doing something, and I don't mean to downplay this, but something more meaningful than seasonal work. People with college degrees that are waiting tables. I waited tables. Nothing wrong with it. But that's probably not what they went to college for.
Sure.
Right? And so, but when that's the only thing that's available, and they're probably working that maybe as a second or third job, like we're not doing something right. And so the intersection of kind of those 3 things, and I think especially this idea of being anchored. So we talked about in our early missions, this idea of what would it be like to create an anchoring sense of place and make that attainable for people. So we say home, but it has like lots of meaning. Home is more than just the place where you like walk in and drop your keys off and throw your stuff on the floor. It's this jumping off point that when it's messed with, I think it radically affects the way that people work, the confidence that they have in approaching relationship and jobs and all the other things. And so when people don't feel like they have a good solid place to jump from, I think we're messing with what a community can do. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at the transient kind of nature of this region, there's a lot of neat people that come in trying to figure out how to make it work, and a lot of them leave. And you're in real estate. Yeah. You see it. It's actually one of the reasons why it's good to be in real estate here.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's pros and cons to
right?
that too,
so there, a lot of it was that piece. And I spent 4 years of my life traveling, doing some consulting stuff. And while it was great work and I loved the people that I was doing and the money was fabulous, I think I felt like a hypocrite because I knew there was need here, and I was getting on a plane and flying and giving the best of myself to communities that I'd never see those people again.
Sure.
It was just such a strange way to spend weeks, like go in and run these workshops and meet all these people and then go, I'm exhausted and I'm going to fly back and see my wife and my kids for a weekend, and I'm going to do it again. And there's probably something better, even if it doesn't pay the same or whatever. Mm. And so it was just all of those problems were kind of running around in my head. And Timber Age was really an outcome of me visiting with this really great group of advisors that I've been blessed to have in my life, and just talking about, I found, I think, a way to be able to use ponderosa pine. So like that's the forest side of it. It was like, we're never going to have healthy forests unless someone has something to do with ponderosa pine. You're going to have to figure out, well, why don't people use it?
Yeah.
And so, not to go too far into the wood science stuff, but it's just really not very good to use in a traditional building sense with dimensional lumber. But we've got all of this technology out there, and I was talking with a gentleman, Ed Mooney was his name, and we were just brainstorming, and he had heard this special about cross-laminated timber on NPR. And so I started geeking out on it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this could be a way to be able to use the trees that are all around us that are in these forests that are overcrowded and, prone to disease and all these other things. And so then it just became kind of an obsession, and I think people were very tired of me talking about cross-laminated timber. But I was thinking about it for several years, and Justin Osborne was one of the catalysts where I think it was December of 2017. He was like, "Dude, I can't believe the people paying $350 a square foot for the junk."
Yeah.
He's like, we got to do something different. And I was like, okay, well, maybe we try and do a spec house or something. Well, then you learn, if you think about it, if you're using Legos to build something, it's way easier to build a really nice looking Lego project if you have instructions.
Sure.
And it's so building with cross-laminated timber is a lot more like building with Legos. And so you got to get all sorts of stuff done ahead of time from a design standpoint. And we were like, how do we pay for that? You can't get a mortgage for architecture fees, right? It's a soft cost. And so we were like, okay, what if we wrote a grant? And so I decided in January, 2 weeks before the grant was due, to write a wood innovation grant with the Forest Service. Had a group of people, Andrew Hawk, a good friend of mine and a fellow biologist and stuff, was one of them, and he ended up being the co-founder of Timber Age. So he helped me kind of work through this thing, and we submitted it, and I really didn't think anything was going to happen. We formed the company just so that we could submit it in the name of the company. And I was training for the Iron Horse, and I was riding up Edgemont Hill on my bike, and I got a phone call from the local Forest Service representative, Tim Reeder, and he was like, hey, guess what? They're going to give you $243,000 to try and build the first cross-laminated timber structure in southwestern Colorado. And I was like,
wow.
Oh my gosh, what the heck am I doing? Had every week booked that summer, in Arizona doing consulting work. But then it got real fast.
Yeah.
And so we started with this idea of thinking we were going to build cross-laminated timber. What it really boils down to is that's not what people need. People need durable, modular, locally produced, panelized homes. And so that's what we do. So there's a lot more value that we're adding than just throwing some boards together to make a panel.
Yeah. So real quickly, what is cross-laminated timber?
So cross-laminated timber, or CLT for short, is a way of really solving some of the problems of what it looks like to build with dimensional lumber. So all of us have sorted, the bent 2x4s or the crooked 2x4s out at the Home Depot or whatever. So if you just try and use the board, it doesn't want to stay straight. So we've solved that through starting to do laminations or glue things together. And most of us have seen glue lams. So we've seen these beams but they only have bearing surface or bearing strength in one direction. So we set things on them, but we don't necessarily build walls and floors out of it.
Gotcha.
So it was a way of taking that same idea of using the glue and multiple boards that tend to kind of equalize out and become much more dimensionally stable, and do that in a panel form.
Because you're crossing.
That's
grain.
right.
Okay.
And so now we take a layer of boards, put some glue on it, and then go 90 degrees with another layer of boards, and then go 90 degrees back. And then, so they're usually odd numbers of layers, but because you've got the odd numbers of layers and you've got essentially this desire for the wood to move, but randomly distributed throughout the panel, you end up with this thing made out of ponderosa pine that's accurate, within a tenth of a millimeter, and it stays pretty much that way.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So that ends up looking somewhat like a 2x4 or 2x6 or some other dimensional piece of lumber, or is that?
No, it ends up looking like kind of plywood on steroids.
Okay.
So like our panels are either, when we start with a raw panel, it's either 4 feet across by 10 feet tall or 5 feet across by 10 feet tall. Okay. So, it's a 300-pound block of wood that's 3 inches thick.
Okay.
And that's really small, because cross-laminated timber at kind of the mid-rise and high-rise scale are 8 or 10 feet wide by 40 feet long or 60 feet long.
But that ends up becoming, or whatever you cut that into, that ends up becoming the entire exterior or interior wall, correct? Or
okay. Wall, or most often it's a floor plate.
Okay.
So it allows people to be able to replace all of the steel and girder systems and all that kind of stuff that they would use. So if you're doing it on a commercial scale, what you get is a much lower part count. You get a much lower embodied carbon, and you get faster assembly times.
Gotcha.
Because it's people running out there with screw guns, basically putting stuff together. And so you don't need as much of the ironwork side and a lot of those kinds of things. So that's kind of, but we realize that's not what people need here.
Sure.
Yeah. And so I don't know exactly where that fits into the story, but when I started thinking about it, I was like, well, maybe we just make cross-laminated timber here. And so that was some of the first things that I did, because I'd moved here to run a wood processing facility in Mancos, Western Excelsior. And so I started talking to the equipment manufacturers and I was like, oh my gosh, this stuff is freaking huge. Like, I don't think we can make a plant for less than $7 million, and it's probably 10 or 20,000 square feet.
Jesus.
And I had people that were like, yeah, maybe we'd invest in that. And I was like, I don't think I would invest in that. Like I'm talking to people and they have no idea what it is. So no one's going to know how to design with it, engineer for it. No one's making that kind of building in this region at some point, perhaps. But it was so clear that we had to figure out a way to kind of like put our toe in the water. And so all of this has been about this idea of kind of how do you de-risk something. And there's this guy named Eric Ries that wrote The Lean Startup. I don't know if you've ever read that book, but I've been an operations guy for the last 20 years. And so I really didn't have lots of wisdom around startups. But for me to like do something huge, especially in an industry where I knew how difficult it was to have log truck drivers and how dangerous it was. Like there were all these things that were like, that's a huge bet.
Yeah.
To try and just go big like that. And so it really became about this idea of, he calls it a minimum viable product. So it's like, what is the quickest, cheapest way to be able to test a hypothesis? And so Timber Age, kind of since the beginning, has been about a series of experiments with a bigger picture in mind. But it's like, what's the thing we have to test right now to know whether or not the idea stays viable? And so, it started with this idea of, okay, well, can we make cross-laminated timber? Well, we are not going to be able to experiment with making 8-foot by 10-foot panels.
Sure.
8-foot by 40-foot panels, but we could make something smaller. And so we were like, well, we got to press this stuff together. How do you do that? Well, how do people press things together? What's the cheapest way to do that? It's a vacuum bag. So people have been making veneers forever, guitars and all sorts of cool stuff with vacuum bags. And so we're like, okay, well, how much is one of those? Oh, look, we can, go to vacuumpress.com and, oh, look, they have a return bag that we can get for this much. And it just happened to be 5-foot by 10-foot that you could actually put that size panel in there. Okay. But when we started talking, so we get the grant. I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but we get the grant, and so we start. Basically, the grant doesn't pay for equipment, but it pays for people to think about this project.
Okay.
Which was really kind of the idea, because we were like, okay, someone has to design it. Like, we have to do all this stuff, and those are all soft costs that we have to pay for up front. And so the grant, when we wrote it, had basically 3 pieces. It was build the first cross-laminated timber structure in southwestern Colorado. Okay. Use at least one panel made from locally harvested ponderosa pine. And then the third piece was get at least 50% of the design and engineering expertise locally sourced. Because we were like, we're trying to like seed, right, this area. And it allowed us to have conversations with bankers and insurance people and real estate folks and like builders and all these. So we probably did 100 different interviews with people to try and understand. And when we talked to them about buying a 8-foot by 40-foot panel from Montana or Quebec or wherever it was, they were like, okay, so cross-laminated timber. And I was like, yeah, have you heard of it? Oh yeah, it's like glue lamps, right? And I was like, actually it's not.
Yeah.
It's something different. And so we'd explain it and they were like, oh, so it's kind of like a great big Lego block. And I was like, yeah, kind of. Okay, that's pretty cool. How big is it again? 8-foot by 40-foot. Okay. So it's like, you need a semi. I was like, yeah, you probably need a semi to get it here. How much does it weigh? 12,000 pounds, They were like, so you need a crane. Pretty good size crane. Yeah. How much does it cost? It was like $4,000. It was like, and so everybody was like, that's really cool. There's no way I'm going to experiment with a 12,000 pound, $4,000, 8-foot by 40-foot panel that I've never thought about using before in my life. Right. It was like, that sounds pretty cool. Okay.
Yeah. No takers.
No takers. And so where we thought in this grant that we might have someone else manufacture the stuff, we were like quickly finding that it was going to be really difficult for anyone to think about using it. But then it was like, we had the bag in the garage. And so we were like trying to find wood and we were trying to figure out what glues do you use. And I mean, it's kind of hysterical to think how far we've come in 3.5 years, but we make the first 5-foot by 10-foot panel. And I'm showing pictures of it, because we're still talking with people about this, because we had a bag that could make a 5-foot by 10-foot. We were like, well, we figured out how to do a 2x2, and we just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually we found enough wood. Oh my gosh, it's so funny, dude. We're like, where do we get dry ponderosa pine that was locally harvested? Because we don't want to make a panel that we can't put in whatever it is. We still didn't know what the hell we were going to make, but we got to figure out, okay. And so the only place we could find dry ponderosa pine was at Stoner Top Lumber, outside of Dolores over there. So we go over to Stoner Top and we're like, we load this truck up and we come back with this load of lumber and we were like, this is amazing, and we buy a $600 DeWalt planer. And the first time we planed enough wood so 3 layers thick to make a 5-foot by 10-foot panel, it took us 6 hours.
Oh,
it took
Jesus.
us 6 hours with this planer. And we were like, yeah, that ain't going to cut it, is it? So, and then, I like the folks at Raglan's. They're good folks over there, but their sawmill has some pretty good wobble. And so the boards were an inch thick, but by the time you got them smooth on each side, it was like 11/16. So we build this 2¼ inch thick panel that's 5 feet by 10 foot, and you could stand on it. It was really fun. But if you jumped, it was like bending and bouncing. And so I'm just using this story to kind of illustrate all these, iterations that we've been through. And we were like, son of a gun, we're going to have to make 5-layer panels. And then we're talking with this guy, Dr. Andrew Young up at the fort. And the fort has been awesome. And Andrew Young has been incredible on this journey. So right now we have a group of 6 seniors that are doing their seminar project, just understanding what we're doing and breaking our stuff. And so they're spending their entire senior year working on timber age stuff. It's super cool.
That's awesome.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But he starts doing the modeling because I'm a biologist or ecologist, I'm not an engineer. And he's like, hey, you guys, I think if you could make the layers 1 inch thick and it was 3 inches thick, you would have this really, really solid floor panel that people could use. And we were like, oh, gosh, that means we have to buy a sawmill. And so we were like, where do we get a sawmill, So we go through this whole thing and we have this POS Wood-Mizer shipped from Maine here that was supposedly refurbished. By the time we finished with it, we'd replaced every part on it. But we could make our own boards. We started studying how long does it take for the board to dry? How much does it shrink? And so we were starting to kind of build this idea of what it would take to actually manufacture here. And it was clearly going to be at a completely different scale, which was actually good because we were like, okay, well, if you could make these panels in a 1,000-foot garage, you could clearly make it in a bigger one.
Sure.
But everyone can use a 1,000 square foot garage and you can find them anywhere you want. And so this idea kept evolving of what would it look like to do distributed manufacturing with small factories that you could stand up almost overnight with equipment that didn't have 2-year lead times and didn't cost, $800,000 a pop. And really the kicker was when we finally talked with some of these architects and designers and they were like, you guys are making some panels? And we were like, yeah. They're like, how big are they? We're like, 5 foot by 10 foot. So you could like put it in the back of a truck or a trailer. Yeah. And 2 guys could pick it up. Yeah. And they were like, I think I got an idea for it. And so we were like, okay, well, that's pretty cool. Cause that is an entirely different conversation than we had when what we thought we were going to do is just broker cross-laminated timber and try and introduce it to the region.
Yeah.
And
How many years are you into Timber Age at this juncture when this?
So I would say that I started full-time for free in 2019, the beginning of 2019. And so I would say this is a year into it.
Gotcha. Okay.
A year into it. And at that point, now we're like, we have the Osborne Outdoor Kitchen as kind of is being designed. We've found this amazing partnership that we have and really hold dear with Clark and Chapin Architects. So Dustin Chapin is based in the Seattle area, and Matt Clark grew up in Montezuma County. And so he's back here, but they're both just super gifted architects and really progressive and want to make a difference kind of in the world. And so they became the designers for this project. And we started designing where it was like, well, what if we made 5 foot by 10 foot panels? Like, could we just build the whole thing out of it? And then it was like, oh my gosh, we got to figure out how to make 5 foot by 10, like actually make them.
Sure.
And so not just one off. That's right. And it cannot take 6 hours every time. And so then we go down the journey of like, okay, so, and we always knew that we wanted to try and make panels for houses. And that's actually like another thing where you're like, okay, no one's making houses out of this in North America. Like, why not? Yeah. But there were a few people doing. And then every time I looked and found a YouTube video or whatever, it was this thing called Passive House. And I was like, what the heck is Passive House? I'm not a building scientist. It's so funny because you're like, okay, I'm like this ecologist turned industrial engineer for 20 years. I don't even go through that part, but so I've been in manufacturing for 20 years. I'm trying to figure out how to do this. And all these people are talking about Passive House. I was like, okay, well, I guess I better like learn this. And I worked on framing crews and stuff when I was in high school and college. So that was kind of my summer jobs. But so I wasn't ignorant of the building process, but I didn't know how to build CLT. So I go and get this Passive House certification just so I can understand it. And all of a sudden I'm just like geeking on, okay, the CLT is like this little piece of it. But if we want to make houses, there's got to be way, way more to the entire system and approach than just making CLT.
Sure.
So I'm like thinking about, okay, how do we make enough panels that we could actually put this thing together? And it was beautiful that it was the outdoor kitchen because it didn't have to be insulated. So we didn't have to figure everything out. We just had to figure out how to get panels to go together. And then we're like, okay, well, we can't make them fast enough. Okay, so we need a bigger planer. Okay, gosh, the bigger planer needs 3-phase power. Oh, okay, we've got this like 1,000 square foot shop, outside of Ignacio. It does not have 3-phase power, and it's going to be like $50K to like bring 3-phase power all the way to that place. So I was like, okay. So then we're talking with some other guy, and he's like, well, I just bought a generator, and I was like, okay. So I like start looking at generators, and lo and behold, I find this like 100 kilowatt unit that came out of a hospital in Albuquerque on Craigslist, so anyway, like 1/10 of the size, brand new from Honda, was like $4,000, and this one was $6,000. Yeah. And it was like, and we can run a small village, off of it. It was pretty awesome. So then we're like, well, how do we? So it was hysterical because we were running to Albuquerque and we're like driving back with generators, right? That are from 1983 or whatever it was, and then we're like, well, how do we need a fuel tank? So then we're like out on these like farmers, places, finding these unused fuel tanks and dragging those back and just cobbling this whole thing together where all of a sudden it's like, okay, we can actually plane enough wood now in 15 minutes instead of 6 hours. And so we were the whole time kind of designing, what does production look like? How small can we keep it? And we realized this idea of, well, if we could get everything to kind of happen in like 20 minutes or less, that would be a pretty amazing, you probably make $1 million of CLT out of 1,000 square feet in a year, which is crazy to think about, right? If you ran 2 shifts and all the other things. So anyway, it was just like, it kept us saying we don't have to go big. But we definitely needed more money. And so we're going through incubators. We went through Next Cycle, which is a Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment kind of incubator for people that are doing stuff with the environment. And then we went through Southwest Colorado Accelerated Program for Entrepreneurscape. We've like raised money along the way. So I think we've probably raised, I don't know, $500,000 or something so far. But the really cool thing, so I'm kind of jumping around, but I'm just talking. I'm pretty sure that we can build basically like a house a month, probably 2 to 3 houses a month that are almost passive house ready. They would be just about the highest performing homes anywhere in this region. They have the ability to probably last for 200 years if they're taken care of. The wood that's in them would have potentially moved 50 miles total from the time it was harvested till the time it went into the house. And we can probably build one of those plants for less than $1 million.
Yeah.
And then for the 60 million that it takes to do the traditional CLT plant, we could have 60 plants addressing housing issues all over the Intermountain West. Like, it just blows my mind to think of. I'm like, that's so freaking cool, because that's a whole lot of people that are running experiments every day, all of a sudden creating an anchoring sense of place for people that wouldn't have it, and doing it in a way that you don't feel bad about having a 30-year mortgage. I mean, right now, the quality of some of the homes, 30-year mortgage, basically by the time the mortgage is paid for, the house is going to get scraped.
Yeah. Usable life is done at that point.
It's done. Yeah. That's insane. That is not an appreciating asset, right? So I'm going to shut up and let you ask some clarifying questions.
No, so you're good. So, I do want to, just for people, and we'll try and grab some photos to kind of bring into the visual aspect of this. But so we got the CLT panel, but, at your shop, you walk in and you see this, kind of what looks like a corner of a bedroom, if you will, right? You've got CLT building, and you've got to have this mock-up to where you can visually see through it, and you see all the insulation, and you see the exterior hung, you kind of get a visual aspect of what this would look like in a realistic setting, if you will, as best as you can in your, 15 by 15 office or whatever. So, let's just take it back just a second. So from the CLT panel, when did you guys develop the thoughts around, or was that in the same time frame of like, well, we've got the wall, we've got the wood, but we have to resolve the insulation, and we've got to resolve the exterior hung, whatever the exterior cladding of this house is. And so now that is what the potential product that's coming out of Timber Age looks like.
Right.
So when did you go from CLT wall, we can manufacture this, we can do this, we can get beyond this incubator stage, to this is the product that we can actually build homes out of?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. So yes, I would say that we knew from the beginning that it needed to be an entire assembly. We also knew that required us to probably build a permitted house, which is just a really hard thing to get built in this area.
Oh, in our county?
In our county.
You don't mean that our county is not super easy with building permits?
Yeah. Well, I just knew it wasn't going to happen inside of a couple of years, and so I think that was the challenge that we had. Is we were like, we've got to practice at the same time as we're trying to get. So it was like, even if someone committed to an entire house, we had to do something for the next 2 years. And so we used that time to say, well, let's just build uninsulated structures that are less than 200 square feet, because we don't have to have a permit. And so we're like popping up these little sheds, glorified sheds. They were super expensive sheds. They're amazing sheds. But But we knew that the financials didn't work if we didn't make insulated panels. And the whole reason we were making insulated panels was to make a better home. So it's always been, focused on trying to create a better home. But we had to do something and had to try and, pay some of the bills and earn money. And it was really great for us because we got to learn about connection methodology and all of the membranes and all of these things that people probably don't normally think about. But if you want a really, really good performing house, there's all these things we have to think about moisture. You got to think about air movement. You have to think about if you're taking a shower and that moisture's getting pushed outside the house, where does all that moisture condense? Mm-hmm. So there's all of a sudden building science actually really, really matters. And so the whole time we're evaluating different sources of insulation and different membrane suppliers and all of these different things. And so I would say we've been thinking about it from the beginning, even though we've been practicing again with that minimum viable product, sure. which was what would someone buy from us? Mm-hmm. No one wanted to pay for a fully insulated wall because what we were selling was a 200 square foot building. And they were like, I'm not going to live in it. Yeah, and absolutely. So I don't want the insulation, but I love what it looks like and yada, yada. So there's all these random things that we're building that are these little tiny options. But the whole time we're refining it, and the way that we're telling the story, I think gets better. And it becomes, and I think this is key, we don't make CLT. Because if I say, hey, we're a manufacturer of CLT, and you're like, what's CLT? We start talking about CLT. Mm-hmm. And that's actually not the thing that's going to make our communities better.
Sure, absolutely.
It is a better house.
Yeah.
And so I think that was even just a scientist. Sometimes you're just trying to be like super frank and you're like, yeah, we make CLT. It's like, and it's fun to talk about, but people are like, their eyes are glazing over and you're like, okay. So it's better to say, have you ever tried to build a house here in this region? Mm-hmm. What was it like? What did it cost? And talking to people that are in the building trades and saying, it's crazy, but for every framer that joins the trade 5 leave, for every truck driver that joins the trade 5 leave. And so you've got a supply chain that's going to forever be disrupted and probably only more expensive if you're shipping everything from a long way away. Mm-hmm. And you have all of this field expertise that's kind of been what everybody leaned on in terms of home building for the last 100 years, and they're going away like sure. that. And so all of a sudden you're like, oh, so let's talk about environmental impact. Let's talk about comfort. Let's talk about supplying local jobs. So like if you're building a house, all of a sudden those things have a little more resonance, and it just becomes, the CLT just becomes the vehicle that we're using.
Sure, absolutely.
And so then I think we started saying, okay, what makes it really hard to build here? And a lot of it is, it's the environment. And it's like no one wants to be paying someone to shovel snow out of a partially framed building in the middle of winter. So one of the things that we really tried to say, okay, our system has to go up faster. We were like, okay, what's that look like? Well, that's the whole volumetric modular, which is a fancy word for shipping cubes. Mm-hmm. Like that's pretty cool if you don't have to ship it very far.
Sure.
But if you buy something from Fading West right now, you're going to pay $10,000 to get it from Buena Vista to here.
Sure.
And there was no value created in that $10,000. It's just transporting something here. Mm-hmm. And so we were like, okay, well, let's not ship big cubes of air. Let's go with this idea of panelized, because that's much more likely to get into some of the areas here in the back of a trailer that someone could pull or whatever, So we just kind of kept staying with this like small idea. And so we came up with, okay, well, let's just build a finished wall on the inside. And what would it look like to be cladding ready on the outside? Mm-hmm. And man, how cool would it be if all of the fastening could happen from the inside, so that as soon as you had all of the walls up, people are working inside as much as possible.
Yeah.
And the other thing that you notice in residential is the number of times that people make trips around the house. And so we were like, could we actually have a couple people working on the inside, attaching everything. One time that you put the scaffolding up, and then there's just one trip around the house, and it's like done. You're not jacking with any of that stuff anymore. And so I would say that I think we have a super solid system, and we've got 5 potential buildings that are probably going to go up in 2023 between like now and August, where we get to test
like
that.
Single family dwelling type buildings?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's 3 single family dwellings. There's a library for a charter school over in Cortez. One of the houses, potentially 2 of the houses, want to go to California, one to New York, and then there's 2 of them here. And the one that I think we're most excited about is the town of Ignacio has partnered with Timber Age as well as LPEA and the tribe, Southern Ute tribe, to build a pilot home that could potentially lay the groundwork for, 40 residences in Ignacio. That it's going to take a huge effort.
Sure.
Because we're going to have subsidies come through, and there's like a lot of these pieces, but it could be, one of the highest efficiency, lowest embodied carbon developments that's ever shown up in the United States, which is really, really cool.
No, it's amazing.
To think about like 40 homes all built from wood, right, that was harvested within 50 miles of the place.
Yeah. You had talked about in one of our meetings the other day, and I thought it was a really great concept. And I don't know if this is kind of fallen by the wayside, because I know that some of the grant funding was lost or wasn't acted upon in a timely manner. But, there was the potential of you guys actually getting to build this, 10,000 square foot facility. And, when you were talking about it, you talked about, partnering with, Phoenix Recycling and using their plastic byproduct or all of their plastics to create your insulation for your homes, and reducing, the whatever methodology they're using to recycle or haul off, you're kind of cutting those down on the emissions. And so it's like all of a sudden, like just in a 20-minute conversation, I'm sitting there and not saying a word because I'm a gigantic dummy. But it was so profound to think about realistically, 90% of all of this could happen within a 50-mile radius of this area. We're cutting down on shipping. We're cutting down on insulation. We're already recycling. Why not go ahead and buy that back and kind of redistribute that into these homes? And it was just checking all of these boxes. And it's like, this seems like the product that makes the most sense, And then so I kind of left that meeting and started talking to, some people about it, sort of, because I do think that, I am a real estate agent by trade. And I love the job, but I can't afford to buy a house here, and that's really scary. And then I think, okay, well, what about my children? Granted, the market's not going to continually, increase as the way that it did over the last 2 years, but it starts to really kind of impact you on a local level of like, well, what do I do? Like, I'm helping people buy and sell homes or land all day long. But if the people that live here and breathe here, and it's not a second home, or it's not we're buying a house for our son who's going to the Fort Lewis College, that really starts to impact you like in a physical way. And it's almost like you feel like this layer of almost, a depression, because you're like, well, like I can't even function in this community. What am I going to do? And so it really started to impact me in that way. And then I was talking to other people trying to get this concept of what and loosely paraphrasing what you're trying, and I can't even come close to articulating what you said. But just talking about it, and like one of the common like strings that I kept getting back from people was like this like modular conception, and it's like, well, it's like almost there's this stigma around a pre-manufactured or like a modular concept, right? And it's like you almost have to go in there with like a PowerPoint to show people like, okay, here, let me just put this into perspective for you guys. Like these 3 hotels in this corridor of Durango, it's modular construction. These walls were made in a manufactory, a plant someplace in Ohio, or they were made elsewhere and brought into here. Right. And so it's like, we're okay with that because we stay there 1 or 2 nights a year on vacation and everybody's okay with it. It looks great on the outside, but there's a stigma against you living in a manufactured home. What is the difference? We're actually saving time. We're saving energy. And these gentlemen, like, having been an electrician for years, the summer months are great working, but yeah, you still are. You're going from the truck, you're going to here, you're going from and there's no systems in play because we're constantly juggling different trades. The electricians are stepping on the plumbers, and this finished trade is stepping on this rough end trade. And so it's like there's no, practices or procedures set in place that you can do in an assembly line. And so then in my head, I'm going, well, this is way more effective. And then God forbid there's a snowstorm and we've got to put up a 30-foot ladder to hang up a sconce that some millionaire bought in Glacier Club. This doesn't make any sense. This is not cost effective for anybody. And so I found it so strange that was not the only, but one of the commonalities. And I think that has to come from other industries that, you do see, and this is not a negative on anybody that lives in a mobile home or a manufactured home on a permanent foundation, whatever. A person has to do what they have to do in this life to be able to move forward, right? I will not put any shade on anybody living in that. But even from an appraisal standpoint, a modular home is always appraised less than a stick-built home. And I'm going, okay, so it adheres to HUD standards. Any more of those have changed, and now they're 2x4 walls and they're 2x6 exterior walls. What's the difference? You're saying that this is of less value because it was made over here, put on a trailer, and shipped to here. So then I'm going, it's still a house. It's on a permanent foundation. You can't get a loan unless it's strapped to that permanent foundation. That sounds real similar to floor joists in a stick-built home. And then your exterior walls are 2x6. That's exactly what a stick-built home looks like. And then, wow, your snow load has to be, rated towards the county. Same thing with a stick-built home. You start checking all these boxes. I'm going, what's the difference? It's the stigma that has come with it. Maybe for years and years, they weren't manufactured to a quality standard that we wanted or that we got out of a stick-built. But that doesn't have to be the case.
Right. In fact, in many ways, it's so much more regulated than anything that's going to happen in the field.
Yeah. So that was that stigma. Yeah. That's why I wanted you on here so bad. Is okay, this is a product. This is a viable product. It's a viable product for creating jobs in our area, for reducing, our carbon footprint and having less impact, using product that's already like you said, the force of using products here. How do we go about getting people to have a mental shift to get around the stigma that's associated with modular construction?
And that's a good one. I think one of the best examples that I've heard used and that I tend to use is, how weird would it be if you wanted a new car and you started talking with Ford or Lexus or Toyota or whoever, and they were like, well, we're going to have to get our subs together and we'll try and get everybody to show up in your driveway, right, in the right sequence. And, it's hard to get everybody organized. So sometimes you'd be like, okay, I might have my car built, right, in a year and a half. So we take for granted the efficiencies and effectiveness of offsite manufacturing in almost every other area of life except for our homes. And the irony is it's usually the most expensive thing that we ever buy.
Sure.
So we would never accept someone showing up and building our car in our driveway over the course of several months.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good analogy. Actually, that hits home pretty well. I never thought about it like that.
Oh my gosh, it is. And so I just don't, I think that but I guess I don't know that I'm answering whatever the deeper thing is. And I think what we're noticing is so often the main reason that people have moved away was in a race to the bottom for the least cost item. Mm-hmm. And I think that we have to be so careful because when we are trying to make the cheapest thing possible, there really is no win. Because as long as people are valuing the price over the quality, mm-hmm. and I think that's the other piece in homes that really makes it difficult is you want the value of this entity, this home, to go up over time, but you're not expecting it to own it for its lifetime. And so the housing industry is super confusing because there are all of these different competing definitions of success. Mm-hmm. The homeowner is like, well, it doesn't need to last 30 years. I'm going to be here for 7.
Sure.
On average, and I just want it to have good resale. And so if you're trying to sell durability, you'd think that would have a ton of value to an individual homeowner, but I don't know that it has as much as all of the instantaneous things that they're going to get, which is going to be, what did I have to pay for it? How big is my monthly note? How much does it cost to heat and cool? So that's like one of those places where you start to be able to see some immediate benefit of quality start to show up, but you have to be able to tell that story well. Sure. And I think that's a huge challenge. You have, to your point, the level of sophistication in scheduling is terrible. And so for most people, it's like, how do I get in and get out and not have to mess with everybody else's stuff?
Sure.
From a trade standpoint, the general contractor is usually charging, a percentage for overhead and profit on top of time and materials. And so ironically, they're not motivated by cost either. So the homeowner thinks it sucks they have to pay this much. The GC is like, oh, those lumber prices, terrible. Yeah. Terrible, isn't it? Terrible. Yeah. And I love 14% of that number versus that. And so you have like really no other industry in the world. Actually, I would say like insurance and the medical field is an interesting one, because the people that are paying the bills are not the same people that are receiving the service. And in some ways, housing is very similar. And if you look at the amount of waste that exists in the medical field and insurance payments and all that kind of stuff, similar thing to the homes. But there was a McKinsey and company did this amazing study a number of years ago. And I don't know where they got the data from, but they used this idea of, in 1965, if you paid $100 and you said, okay, that $100 gets me this $100 of service. And they basically did construction and they did non-farm, and they were comparing those two. So the crazy thing is, in non-farm, which is manufacturing and all that kind of stuff, that $100 in 1965 gets you $100. You go 50 years forward, that $100 gets you on average like $300 worth of product. If you take the Toyotas and some of the really, really elite manufacturing companies of the world, it could be $1,600. So that $100 gets you $1,600 of value 50 years later. And on average, in non-farm, gets you $200 to $300. Guess what it is in construction 50 years later?
I don't know.
It gets you $85.
Oh, God.
Worth of product.
Wow.
And so you're like, it's not that we don't know how to do things better, but there is something systemically that's keeping us from making the leap.
Yeah. I mean, every framer I've ever talked to about, whatever, if it's SIP panels, if it's, it doesn't matter, your product, they're like, you can't do that any cheaper. I'm like, I don't know. Like, I would stand to argue that you could. I mean, especially like a one-off, no, you're always going to fail it the first time, right? You're going to you're going to get better and more efficient as you go along. But like, let's say that the manufacturing facility was done and you had trades crew over here with your best general contractor out here and framing crew and all these, and you built a house over here, like in the facility that was already like a steam engine just going. I would take $1,000 bet right now that the guys inside of that nice conditioned space are going to put that house up faster than the guys out in the sweat or the winter. And everyone I've ever talked to, and it's like almost like fear of like losing their job, or something is like, oh, there's just no way. I'm like, why? Because you have a crane? Okay, great. You also didn't pay, a 6-man crew to frame this house for 3 straight days.
Right.
And they're like, well, yeah, but the crane's okay. So now we're talking efficiency. Let's say that the crane costs exactly as much as the guys. All right. So those same guys that are very skilled that you've been paying all this money to do those exterior walls, what if they're working on other stuff simultaneous to the crane being there? And I'm in my head, I'm going, you've got one guy operating a crane and you got a tagline holder. As soon as it hits the base, there's 2 guys anchoring something in to hold it from falling left or right. Right. And so I'm going, we're cutting significant man hours out of this equation. And that same amount of man hours can be impactful over here doing something else. Like what? And it's, the conversation always ends on, nope, done it before. I did a project somewhere. No
Yeah.
matter what, the kid could be 18 years old and he's done a SIP panel project somewhere, and it just doesn't make sense, right? It's not the truth. So I would challenge somebody to go, okay, well, like, just give it a chance. If the funding's there, let's give this thing a chance. If it fails, then it fails.
Yeah.
We move on about our business and we go, man, we've got to re-engineer something better. But I feel like, just like you're saying with the building industry, it's like it's not given a chance to build economies of scale and to, really start to kind of, hone in on how much more efficient can we be. Same exact house square footage over here. If it's 350, if you cut that house to 300, we may not hit AMI, right? We might not be, hitting attainable prices, but we're cutting significant cost.
Right.
And then add on top of that where, okay, now we've got an efficient product. We've got a semi-quasi affordable product. It's well insulated. Our impacts for our monthly services, like with utilities, are going to be significantly less because your R value on the insulation that you're creating here locally is going into this building, and it's light years beyond anything we have today. And so I'm going, we have an efficient build, like you're going to save monthly. So you may pay close to the same. You may pay a little bit less. I don't know. Until you build those first 5 or 6 and you go, okay, you know what? Actually, we can beat any stick-built home by 40%. If you can make that claim after the 5th or 6th or 10th, that's great.
Yeah.
But if you can't, if it costs you the same, you still, then what? Like, you're going to have fees over here. You're going to have less fees over here. So it's like, which one is better? And I can't get any person in the building community to like look at it and go, we could actually do this. I'm like, it's just an immediate like, okay, like, are we talking about, a self-checkout at Walmart versus an actual individual, a person? No. Those same jobs come into the manufacturing facility and they do the same work. Maybe they have to train and do something slightly different, and maybe, unfortunately, they didn't get to spend 6 months on a single house.
Right.
But you're working the same amount of hours every day.
Well, and that we're building roof panels right now for a house, and they're 8 feet wide by 21 feet long. And so it's an R52. It's, basically it's the finished surface on the inside, and it's ready for the roofing on the outside. It's going to have corrugated. And as you were talking, it just made me think about it. I was like, so, we're going to cover 160 square feet of roof. Every time one of these panels goes on, this roof is going to have 10 panels that get set. They probably get set in an afternoon, and no one's going to have to actually be on the roof for the majority of it. They'll just be able to be on scaffolding in the top floor of the house. So you're going to get an entire roof and the insulation and all the finishing and in a day. And no one is going to have to be up there on a ladder, bent over, backwards, doing TNG in between rafters. And like how would you even get the insulation, right? Someone's going to have to be up there blowing it in or what. I mean, so like all of that was done without a person being more than 4 feet off the ground. And so even if it was a complete wash, I mean, I don't think people understand what kinds of costs are paid for workman's comp insurance, especially in the roofing world. I mean, it's like we are asking, I think that's the other part where it's just like, I don't know if we just want to be tough, but it's like, no, you got a chance to like hold a tag line and be on scaffolding, driving a few screws. Yeah. Or you're going to be on a roof bent over for 3 days. I mean, like there should be no comparison. Yeah. And if I'm honest, there's so much of it that's really what I'm motivated by. I feel like somehow we're rationalizing not taking care of each other in the way that we're doing construction right now. Yeah. If you come from the manufacturing world, like, and you did what we do in the construction world, if you had trip hazards everywhere and you had people up in the air, like OSHA would shut you down in a second. Sure. Yeah. And yet somehow we just make excuses that it's okay for us to abuse people and then wonder why they're leaving. You call them wimps or whatever, because they're like, no, this sucks. Yeah. Like there is a much better way to make this money and take care of my body and the people that love me and make sure that I'm going to be around than doing what I'm being asked to do on this construction site. Like we're just better.
Sure.
We're better than what we're asking people
better
to
human
keep paying
beings.
for and buying, and the risks that they're taking. And so there's a big piece of what we're trying to do that's that as well. It's just how do we take better care of each other?
Sure. Well, I think it's going to take, to me, and I hate to say prove the system wrong, but I think unfortunately you've taken the longest way around possible, to have to do this. And, from the first time I heard it, granted, you guys were whatever iteration you were into this. Like, when I first saw your product, it made sense. Click. So year one, you're pitching CLT. Year two, you're doing this. Well, finally, you've gotten it to this point to where, we're past having to kind of meet the terms of the grant, right? We're not doing Osborne's outdoor kitchen, which is amazing, by the way, but we're actually moving this into, so it's like almost coming to fruition. So now we're seeing you in Ignacio and you're building these couple houses. In my mind, if there's a possible way to say, okay, well, this is our prototype. If we can showcase that prototype, then it's almost like you get that, it's like once the big wheel, is like this guy I used to work for is like classic, like, a guy from Canada, but he's like, you got a small wheel, you hit a speed bump, you're done. You get a big wheel and the thing's spinning and it just keeps getting motion. It hits the same speed bump. It might slow for a second, but it's never going to stop. Yeah. And that was his entire model. Like build it as big as you can, steady, slow growth. And you can take a hit here. You can take a hit. You take a sliver out of the pie, but the rest of the pie collapses in on that. And we keep going as a whole. I think it's going to take that, and I'm hoping that this situation you're doing at Ignacio can be used as kind of a huge case study. And it will not be as efficient as you could be in 5 or 6 years.
Absolutely.
That's people are going to look at that and they're going to say, oh, well, we could do that. I mean, a house like those, 1,900 square feet. It's a single shed roof. It's finished. Okay. All right. Maybe you could on the first product. How many people wasted gas, fuel, all kinds of stuff? Oh, I forgot this trim can. Oh, I forgot this, spigot from Ferguson's. I had to go from, Purgatory all the way back to Durango.
I paid for this dumpster.
And
filled it.
Yeah.
With all this stuff that I moved out there, right?
So it's like, it's gonna take that case study to really just showcase this product because, some people don't want a smaller, more efficient house. They're just in that, and this, I won't say this is a negative to anybody, but some people want a grandiose, 4 or 5 bedroom home. And, they want that. That's their American dream. And that's what they want. God damn it. And they're not going to change their minds no matter what.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's not the product that you're building. The product that you're building makes sense. And that's what, like, when I saw the first couple sets of your drawings, it was like, even if the gentleman that had like the two, like, it was like a cantilever type thing with like possible, like that was so streamlined. It was all straight. It was all cut. It made perfect sense. It got square footage, but it still was modular. Everything, you could tell that everything was usable. Everything was well designed and thought out. There's so much waste in a house. Like there's houses right now. I just looked at some plans the other day with a builder friend of mine. Because of the county codes, the upstairs, because of the square foot of the lot, the amount of square footage can only be X amount per house, right? So the second story, they had to bring the walls in on each side 3.5 feet. And so they can't use it even as storage, nothing for the county regulations. So they burned up, like it was 25 by 3 feet on both sides of the upstairs to meet standards. And I'm like, what? Yeah, that is so wasteful. What are we doing? And so
when we've got all these people that can't afford one, period.
Yeah. So we're just going to burn up this square footage, so multiply that in a track house, facility or a community, 40 homes times that waste. Boom. We just built this house for this person over here for almost free,
Yeah.
So I'm so happy to hear that you are working with Ignacio and I don't know if it's a possibility if they will allow you to do a case study, but if you guys do or have footage on it, I want to see it because it's one of those things. It's like, I think I brought a gentleman to your facility 2 months ago or something, and his brain was like, "What is this?" I'm like, "Well, this is a corner of a house. This is like when you go to Home Depot and they've got like something exposed and you can see how it's wired. Like this is a detail like that. Like but in his mind, he's like, I got to see one done, and I'm like. You can't imagine. There's no thought beyond right here at Kyle's office, And so I think that getting to the point of like this is it. It's built. This is how it looks. This is the finished product. Then all of a sudden people can go, oh,
It
okay,
is.
I got you. You know,
Yep. No,
it's
I
going to
think,
be your picture on the Lego box.
yeah,
You know, but
Yes.
this is what the finish. All you got to
You're-
do is follow the directions.
you're right. It's terribly frustrating because, you keep making pro formas and talking about, what's going to happen when, and I think you're right. I think we picked just about the worst thing in the world to try and do a startup around. It probably also means that that there's the most room for improvement.
Absolutely.
There's like so much low hanging fruit, and it's easy to get up for every day. But you're exactly right. I think you can model and you can show spread. Like, I think that's what we've learned. Where it's like, you know what, it's not doing me any good to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not doing any good for us to have a conversation. Like, why don't you come with me and let's go work on something. Let's go build something, because all of the talk is just drawing us away from the thing that is actually in the way, which is we have to have examples.
Mm-hmm.
We have to have case studies. And unfortunately, we're doing it in a place that it's really difficult to get lots of case studies done. And in a time where, I think that's the other thing that we're realizing is, unfortunately, we're going to have to GC almost everything
You will.
for the first few of them,
I've
because
seen that out of the first few meetings. It's like nobody wants to dive into the deep end
no
with you.
one will dive in there. And I think they will for a second, but it's not their fault that the spreadsheet that they use doesn't work for our product.
Sure.
So there's education and there's tools that we have to do, and all of that stuff where you're like, man, there's so many customers in the housing industry. It's different than a software product where you've identified this niche and these people, and it's like super specific. It's like they drink their coffee like this on the, there's a lot of product releases that happen like that and startups that happen with that kind of a scope. And unfortunately, ours is like, it's, oh my gosh, it's just this big bowl of poo, and you're like trying to tease out the important pieces in the order that they need to happen. And I think that's why it's so important that we didn't go try and raise $20 million
Yeah.
and build a huge factory, because
Is the factory off the docket? Like, or is that ever?
I would say it's off the docket. Yeah.
Forever or for?
No, I mean, we would love to actually go out and do a raise, not just for the Durango facility, but probably for the next 3 at the end of next year.
Nice. Okay.
So we'd love to move into 3,000 square feet is really kind of, I think, the sweet spot for this. It doesn't necessarily need to be a lot bigger than that. That lets us, we've built enough stuff. We just built our, 360th panel. It was pretty cool. I was like, that's crazy to think about, 360 panels, and that's nothing for some of these places. But for us, that's a big, big deal, because there's a ton of learning that's happened in there. And so our ability to talk with confidence about what it takes to do it, I feel super confident. What we need is a backlog. And so that's why I'm so excited to be able to say, okay, yeah, I think there's like we might be reaching the point where if we get deposits, someone's going to have to get pushed to the following year.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we've got to be. And I don't know what turned. Sometimes I think it's just time. But I think a lot of it is, it's just, there's no substitute for all the experimentation that's happened to this point. And for us to be able to have 3,000 pictures that show this was us with Gorilla Glue and this bag in a garage. And this is, an 8 foot by 21 foot gorgeous panel getting ready to be dropped into place that's more efficient than I think anything that we could have done in a traditional sense.
Are you guys already standing walls on the place at Ignacio? Are you to that point, or how
so,
what does that look like?
Well, so I think that's this thing about we built the floor for it, and the assumptions that they made about the site fell through. And so it was the land was annexed by the town, and I think that they're just trying to take care of the people that live there. But the folks were like, you know what, it's not, we don't want another house there. It's going to get in the way of our view. And instead of moving forward with that spot, we bagged that whole thing. So it's going to be in a completely different spot
Gotcha.
now.
So got to go back to the drawing board as far as re-engineer. You got to try and make the
Yeah, it'll
topography.
probably just move window openings and all that kind of stuff. So really we can't, until we know exactly where it's going to sit, we can't finish the window details and door details and all that kind of stuff. And so luckily we've got, other projects, but there's been like a hurry up and wait that's been brutal for us, because from a staffing standpoint, I talked about I was working on a panel, 20 minutes before I walked in here today. And I'm doing that because we've had a bigger team, and we've had some team members that have left, I think on great terms or whatever, but we haven't rehired because it's so scary to build the production capacity, and then everybody's busy for a month, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, now we're doing improvements. Well, that's not a great return for our shareholders.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to be super cautious about staffing. We're really optimistic about the backlog that's starting to show up. And I think it completely changes the way that we get to think about the business. But really, once the case studies are done. And so it was really cool to be, to deliver the first insulated panel, which happened this last, 2 weeks ago.
It's pretty awesome.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah. I mean,
it's
that's
really cool. I'll show you some pictures because it's freaking awesome.
Yeah. I mean, people here in this city, they may think that it's real similar, but to hear the story, to go from, being in your garage and, it's no simple task or feat to get to where you guys are at. Granted, we talked about it in an hour, but I just can see that, and it's, there's such a huge future to what you're doing, in my opinion, and some might think I'm absolutely crazy. You may think I'm crazy, but I think that there's a huge future, and it's just going to be.
No, I got a lot riding on this one.
Yeah, but, it makes perfect sense, and I'm I'll be the first person to tell you I'm probably halfway crazy, but when I hear somebody talk and they can convey and articulate not only the details but also the passion in the same conversation, that's what drew me to you in that first conversation with. I don't remember if it was at your shop or if it was here at Bayfield, but. No, it was here in Bayfield because, I think we met, Justin actually introduced us. And, we were kind of just talking about this and that and the other, and it was very cut and dry because we had a specific thing that builder was wanting us to get out of you. Can you do this? Can you not? But when I sat in that meeting with you here at the town of Bayfield and watched you articulate with absolute conviction and passion the product, it was like, that shit's going to pop. It may not be today or tomorrow, but I believe in it, and it makes way more sense than anything current. And so it's like, I'm glad to see that the dots are connecting. It's
they are.
It's a ceiling panel, but it's the first ceiling panel, and I think, the future is going to be huge for you guys. So.
Yeah. Well, the really cool thing is it's a ceiling panel made up of 5 of our CLT panels, and it's within a millimeter.
Yeah.
Of the way it was designed digitally. It all came off the CNC. And so it's sick to see wood that is made that accurately.
So perfect.
That by the time you put 5 of these things together, they're going to be plus or minus 2 millimeters. I mean, it's pretty cool to be making things that way out of a locally harvested timber, with a insulation that's sequestering carbon. All the things that you've said, I feel like it's resonating with a lot of people, and that's super important. So just you saying I'm excited about it, because when you're in the middle of this, you're like, I am freaking crazy.
Yeah.
What am I doing?
Yeah.
I can't hit a financial return deadline to save my life, but yet we have people calling us from Canada and the best structural engineering firms in America, and people visiting our plant, right, that are like wood experts for the world.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, they're intrigued. So there's something about this.
Sure.
It's not that it doesn't have legs, but boy, trying to pinpoint timing on something that is like this much spaghetti, it's a mess. But
it'll happen. It's going to come together.
It's gonna happen, baby. It's
going
gonna
to
happen.
That first product. I think that's going to be the, that's going to be the, the launch pad.
Yeah.
And so that's where I'm at with it, because, you know, I have nothing invested in your company. I'm just an innocent bystander, but, you know, I kind of had to hold off like talking about it, because not only could I not explain it as good as you can, but also it was like I couldn't show a holistic picture.
Yeah.
And it's like, I've seen it though. I've seen it on the computer. I'm telling you, it makes sense. So
That's right. We just got to come back and do this.
Yep.
In a year, this conversation is going to be
Absolutely.
completely different.
Yeah.
It'll be much more focused,
Yeah.
probably even. Yeah. So
Well,
thanks
Kyle,
for having me, man.
Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you, dude.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Appreciate it, Kyle. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you ever felt
Are you listening? Damn. Yeah. Yeah.